The levels of disparity and depravity that offenders are capable of never ceases to amaze me. But the levels that the person we're talking about today took those to are an all new low, and they were carried out by a woman named Taylor, and we're going to talk about the highlights of her horrific trial in today's video. Hello Sofa Squad and welcome to the sofa. My name's Paul and that's the sofa behind me with Mr. Roscoe P. Coltrane hanging out on it. And today, like I said, we're going to be talking about a case, about a trial that is so next level. You need to go ahead and just buckle your seatbelts up. You're getting the buckle your seatbelt up warning now at the very beginning of this video. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the highlights of the trial. And what I mean by highlights are some of the most what moments of it. There were so many of these moments that it is difficult to even begin to get them down to just a few to watch. So just know that I picked out the ones that I want to discuss for this video. Now what we'll do is we'll use those clips as talking points, and I'll make commentary throughout the video on them about what we're watching in the case itself. Now before we get into it, I do want to give an overview of the case for those who might not have followed it, and we will talk about the victim and how we arrived at this video, at this trial. Now before we jump into all of it, I'm going to go ahead and open the doors up and fluff the cushions up and make room for our sponsor today, HelloFresh. My favorite season is right around the corner, and HelloFresh is helping to usher it in and saving me time in the grocery store and kitchen so I can enjoy the last days of summer. I don't want to be standing in the checkout line, and with HelloFresh, you can cut down on that with their vast selection of meals to choose from that are delivered right to your door. As always, they send you just what you need so you don't have all this extra food taking up space in the fridge and going to waste. The prep and cleanup time for so many of their meals is so fast and so easy. I absolutely love it. Now you already know that fall is my vibe. I love being at home watching feel-good movies or sitting in front of a fire on a cool night. HelloFresh helps those times happen with feel-good foods, and it's less expensive than takeout and the grocery store. Another thing I love about HelloFresh is their variety. They have 40 chef-crafted recipes to choose from each week, from family-friendly to fit and wholesome. They also have quick and easy dinner options that are super fast and quick breakfast and lunches too. Now snack time, they've got you covered. Shop HelloFresh Market and select from a curated selection of over 100 add-on items. So go ahead and give them a try. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code 50 ReportingLiveFromMySofa at checkout for 50% off plus free shipping. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code 50 ReportingLiveFromMySofa at checkout for 50% off plus free shipping. Alright, so be sure and check out HelloFresh. All their stuff is down in the description below. So let's go ahead and do a quick overview of the case, of the victim, and how we arrived here. Now the two central key players in this case are Taylor Schabuisness and Shad. Now the most important one is Shad. This is who lost his life. This is the victim of it. So let's start off and talk about him. We're going to kind of go based on what his obituary said and a little bit that we know about him. So Shad was born on September 7th, 1997 in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Now he shared a home with his mother Tara, and his mother would sadly be the one that would discover his remains down in the basement. Now, Shad had worked with his father and grandfather at the family business, and the obituary did say that he enjoyed camping, games, spending time with his family. He was described as a really kind, compassionate person who often thought of others before himself, a talented artist who enjoyed wood carving. Now, according to Taylor, her and Shad had known each other since middle school, so this wasn't just some stranger. There was a history there. So this crime would take place, technically over a couple of days, starting February 21st, 2022. Now, what would happen is Taylor would pick him up from his mother's house, and they would kind of go off to do a little evening of partying. A friend of theirs joined them. They went off to an apartment. They smoked some weed, did that kind of a thing. Now, here's the only thing is Taylor and Shad were doing a lot more than just smoking weed. They were doing meth. They were shooting trazodone. They were doing a lot of different things. They were kind of on, just a party bench, if you will. So they were doing this, and then they returned to the house, the mother's house, where they would stay in the basement. Now, this basically would start an evening, early morning, session of intimacy, I guess you could say. And now this is according to Taylor, because unfortunately Shad is not here to tell his side of the story. But she would state that they enjoyed doing things to, choke each other, as like, a foreplay, if you will. Now, according to her, they were using chains and whatnot, and essentially she got carried away. Now, she would go back and forth in the story, going from, oh, I didn't know what I was doing, and then I came to and was like, oh, well, I went this far. She had, a lot of different stories on how this went down, but the end result is she choked him and killed him, right? Now, if that wasn't bad enough, okay, she didn't stop there. She would continue to pleasure herself with his body. You do the math on that. This is post-mortem. While she disposed of his body, dismembered him, and did horrible, vile things. I'm not going to go into all the, excruciating details of all this here. A couple of reasons. Number one, I feel like at this point in time, she was doing something so perverse with him. I've not really seen the likes of it, since it reminds me of Jeffrey Dahmer. But also, I feel like she did so much overkill to humiliate his body, his name, his reputation, and just him as a human being, right? And so that's one of the things that really bothered me with this, is the things that she did and how she laughed them off. I mean, it was absolutely horrible. I cannot imagine being the parent, a loved one, or a friend of this man and having to listen to this girl describe the actions that she did against his body. It's absolutely horrible. So we're not going to go into all the details there. I just feel like it's disrespectful. Now, that being said, this would go on for quite some time. She, like I said, would dismember the body. She would drain his blood. She would shower with it. All sorts of things. Now, the truly horrible part is that Tara, the mother, would say that around 2:30 a.m. on the 23rd, there was like a knock on the door or a noise or something. And so basically she was like, okay, what's up? And so she goes to see if Shad is awake and whatnot. And this is when she will discover the head of her son in a bucket. Now, this is one of those things where at first it's like, you're not expecting this, right? So you're going to be like, what, is that even real type thing? Well, authorities are called in, and yeah, it was real. Absolute carnage had taken place in her basement. Now, as you can imagine, there's very little that one can say about this. She would end up eventually pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. So, all that being said, this is how we have arrived at the court date. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with one of the interrogations. Now, here's the thing. There's going to be bleeps that I've had to put in there, and we're not putting all every little bit in there, because some of it is so next level. I haven't even really dealt with an interrogation like this on this channel. We've sat through some horrifying things, but the stuff that she's talking about, the context, the subject matter of what she did to his body and during the acts, like I said, I don't even know what to say about it. So just know that I'm putting some of those clips up. We'll talk about them. One thing I want you to pay attention to in these is body language. Her demeanor, how she's just laughing this off, how this is no big deal to her during these interrogations, right? You're just like, she could be talking about her night out at the club, right? Like, this is no different than that. So let's go ahead and start with that first clip.
I hate the outfit. Never in my life. I'd rather be fucking dangerous than not. Clean the fuck up. What are you doing?
The way that her eyes look, to me at least, it's like there's nothing there. And the fact that she's sitting here talking about the outfit, how she hates that, looking at that hurry up, I'm just like, oh my God, right? It just is so spooky. So let's just let that be the entryway into the vibe of this case.
So, yeah, let me go at it.
But does anybody like strangle the other person?
I like doing that a lot.
Right, so you like being strangled, like having your airway, or do you like doing it to somebody else?
I like doing it to somebody else.
The way she's talking to him, again, it's like the energy that I get off of her, which is always in these situations kind of throws me off, because oftentimes we're used to seeing an offender like this usually being a male, right? And so to sit here and see her describing this, it's like, you know, she's like, oh, I like it. I like doing that to somebody else. Now, hey, this is not to shame if somebody, whatever, right? If there's two consenting people into something and it's not hurting anybody, okay, you do you, boo. This, however, is Jeffrey Dahmer. This is, and we're going to talk about him in a minute because apparently she had a little crush on him. The way she's looking at the investigator, it literally just makes my hair on my arms stand up. I'm just like, I wouldn't want to be left alone in the room with her for obvious reasons.
So it was only a couple hours before you severed his head? Did you fall asleep at any point in time? Or?
Now, here's the thing. This took a long time, right? This was not some random, very quick act and, oh no, well, we cleaned it up and all of this. This was like she took her time with it, okay? All while continuing to do these perverse things to the body. And this is why I was just like, you know what? We're not going to get all up in the details and all the like nitty gritty of the interrogation because she goes into extreme detail with it. And I was like, I just, again, I can't imagine sitting in court and listening to somebody talk about a loved one this way, especially the perpetrator, right? It's just like, I mean, this is insane. Again, I go back to Jeffrey Dahmer and keep that in mind as we're watching this, because again, we're going to see other clips in here how she had a little crush on him. And it makes me wonder, like, was she aspiring for this?
Tupperware container, like a
Food storage tank?
yeah, one of those. And then
So that's where the body parts are in? Or I thought they were in a black bag.
they're scattered around.
Okay, so both probably.
Again, talking about what she wore to work the other day, you know, no different kind of tone of voice, just very nonchalant, very, yep, did this. Okay, here we go. This is what it is. This is somebody who is in their mid-20s, right? Like, who was, you know, even younger than that at this time. That they are capable of this type of monstrosity is almost incomprehensible to me.
Throughout this process, you would cut off a body part with one of the knives, and you would put it in the bag or the tote or something like that.
Yeah, I was still tweaking out, so like, I'm gonna get on it, and then I'm like, wow, it's gonna go. So I grabbed another one, and then I was cutting it, and it was gonna go. And I was tweaking, so like, I'm like, oh shoot.
I mean, the way she talks about, oh, that's tweaking, so I'll be cutting it. I mean, it's like she's getting into it. It's almost like she's reliving it as she's talking to him and getting some kind of excitement out of it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's what happened.
No, you know, he needs got a mom and a sister and a dad and family, and more and more of being sorry, you know.
Okay, that part, yeah, I'm sorry. It's just kind of what happened. You absolutely desecrated this young man's body in his mother's basement. Did horrifying things to the corpse. And all you have to say is, yeah, I'm sorry. And you know what else is sad about it, though? It's more than we heard out of Lori Vallow Daybell, okay? That says a lot right there.
I mean, I didn't, but at the same time, I woke up like, fuck, that's bad. I didn't know what to do, because like, he was gonna be like, fuck, I didn't know. You know what I mean? Because like...
It's like she's a one-woman comedy show. I mean, and this is what I was talking about earlier, where she, you know, at one point it's like, oh, I woke up and, you know, I was like, what did it happen? So I don't know what to do. I just kept going. And this type thing where she goes back and forth. But make no mistake, okay? The evidence will show she was fully aware of what she was doing. This is a monstrous act, plain and simple. Now, another thing that was extremely telling is you would think that somebody who is trying to backtrack their way out of something, you know, or whatever the case may be, would try and put their best foot forward after this. But her bizarre behavior continued even before we got to trial. Let's look at how she handled one of her lawyers in the courtroom in front of the judge. Now, the clip we're watching is during a pretrial motion, and her She finds out that she has to have her trial postponed. She attacks her lawyer. You see they have to subdue her. The cops get her there. Now she will act like she'll come to and be like, what happened? What happened? And they're like, well, you went off on your lawyer. And she tries to kind of play this little game here. Now that lawyer, as you can imagine, recused himself from the case. I don't blame him. And honestly, I would have been scared to be on the case too, because this one, I remember when this came out, this first started happening, I was like, she just comes off as like this feral animal, right? Like just, absolutely all out there. I mean, who does this? Who does the crime, number one? I mean, this is insane, right? But then who takes it to the next level, just out of the blue attacking your lawyer, unless she's trying to put forth an image of, I'm not right, I'm psychotic, because clearly that's where she tried to go in court. Now, let's move things forward and let's look at some statements made by the state. Now, these are actually going to be during closing when the trial's gone on, so that they are kind of recapping through their lens what took place. But let's hear this from a logical, realistic, sofa kind of a view as to what really happened.
I think it was the dope. I blame it on being on drugs and the come down.
Now, this is one thing that she would try to go through and claim during this is obviously, drug abuse, that kind of a thing, but also like a mental break at this specific point in time. Now, here's the thing. There's a lot of people who do a lot of drugs out there in the world, right? They're not doing this kind of stuff, okay? So now I get everyone's different. I get that, right? However, to sit here and try and say, oh, you know what? Sorry, the come down was really hard. I'm sorry. It ain't going to cut it, okay?
It's the defendant's own words that this was fueled by meth. And now it's, well, no, it's bipolar. It's something else, some diagnosis from way before this offense.
Also, this too, I get so tired of hearing these defendants get up here, try and use these diagnoses as, oh, I'm bipolar. Oh, I have this or that. Oh, well, sure, the diagnosis was years ago, but, it is what it is, or it came after, or whatever the case may be, right? Hiding behind these situations and issues that can be real for some people, and a lot of people, but maybe not for this person, right?
Was Ms. Schabuisness suffering from a mental disease or defect at the time of the offense?
And that's what it comes down to, that question. Is that what was going on? Now, we can definitely say there's definitely some kind of moral deficiency going on, right? I mean, come on, right? Someone who was going to do this to another living human being, I don't care what substance you ingested or coming down off of. This is absolutely not right. But just remember that. That's the question at stake here. Was this because of that? Spoiler alert, the jury really ain't buying all this.
So this idea that this manic episode arose and dissipated in a flash, just happening to be around the 5 minutes where she's actually strangling him and then the day that she dismembers Shad, it's utter farce. There's no basis for that.
Amen, brother. Sing it from the bleachers as loud as you can, okay? Here's the thing, and he sums this up so nicely. And again, we see this with so many different defendants and whatnot in this, where they try and get down to this little moment of time of, all this other evidence will show they've been completely fine during life or might have had issues and whatnot, but nothing like this. But then all of a sudden, just in this moment, there's a break in reality, and then they quickly go right back, right? And again, it's just not realistic, except in very small circumstances of things of this nature taking place. One thing that comes to mind, and I don't even want to associate 100% what went on, but a person who had a historical narrative and documented evidence of mental health issues, and that is Yates, the case where she drowned her children, immediately called cops, told them what happened, and then as evidence started coming out, it was like, well, wait a minute, this person showed all of this evidence, this historical narrative of like things were not going, like, she was her husband, the doctors, all this. She should not have been having more children. She was crying out for help. Like there was stuff going on, right?
She's observing. Incidentally, bizarre behavior you haven't observed for 1 second during this trial. For the last 4 days, there's no throwing chairs, there's no outbursts, there's no staring or off.
Now, I would slightly disagree with him on that if we're going all the way back to that pre-trial attack the lawyer thing. But nonetheless, You know, you don't see that during this here either, right? And he's right. I mean, she was abnormal during the trial. She did very weird things, and we're going to show some footage of some of the moments of that. But the psychotic break, the doing this, the doing that, it just isn't there, right? You only have a doctor get up there during this and testify that, you know, she's psychotic and whatnot. And again, what's tricky about this is you're always towing the line of, we know from the sofa right here, right? I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a cop, and not any of that stuff. Just a guy with a sofa and some opinions. But we know from the sofa opinion, she ain't right. Somebody who does this ain't right, okay? Do they know right from wrong? 100% she does. 100% she does. Absolutely. You know, or else you would have called you would have done Andrea Yates and called, I just did this. I just woke up and this happened. You know, I don't know what to do. I'm turning myself in. You know, the whatever, you know, kind of a thing. But when people go and try and cover up the crimes and whatnot, yeah, okay, you know, we knew what we were doing. Let's just, you know, quit wasting everybody's time here.
Because she cleaned up. Because she was aware of the wrongfulness of what she did. She didn't just massacre somebody, dismember him, and leave a war zone down in that basement. No, she cleaned up. Because she knew what was going on.
Exactly. She didn't want to get caught. That's what she did. That's what these defendants do. They don't want to get caught, so they clean up, right? I mean, look at all these other cases that we've covered and whatnot. I mean, just so many of them, they try and cover the evidence up because who wants to spend their life in jail, right? You've gone this far. You've taken the life of somebody for a party night. She probably wants to go back out and keep partying. I mean, it's just as simple as that, unfortunately. Now, in these next clips we're going to watch, you can pay attention to what's being said and whatnot, but mostly pay attention to her body language, to her facial movements and this type thing, because this is very prevalent with her. And the defense psychologist or psychiatrist, I'm not sure which one she was, but she'll testify to this, trying to say, oh my God, you know, here, this means she's just completely off her rocker. You know, I don't think it's that. And I'll get into some of my thoughts about what I think maybe it could be for my sofa opinion after we watch a few of the clips.
For officers, she does that. Order her to put her hands behind her back, she does that. Complying with orders, complying with commands, complying with questions. She's conforming her conduct pretty well, right? She's following the law enforcement's commands. In her interview with law enforcement for a lengthy period of time, she's conforming her conduct. She's not exhibiting any manic symptoms. She's not exhibiting any psychosis in that you heard about. There's just nothing in this case to show that she's not able to conform her conduct. To the contrary, you heard a lot of evidence that not only did she...
Okay, now, when I watch these clips of her, I'm trying to think being alone in a room with her in a setting outside of prison or something. She creeps me out to such a degree. She scares me. Okay, she scares me. Number one, the way that so this whole thing she does like this, like, she does that constantly, and I feel like some of her movements are posturing. It's a way that she's trying to dominate the space that she's in, or take power of it, because she's almost like letting everybody know, like, what? Huh? What? I think she definitely lacks, like, communication skills, right? And how to relate to other people, that type thing. Just seeing her behavior and how she kind of deals with and does this type thing, you know, and this confused look that she'll do. But then she also wears all our feelings on the thing. You saw this moment right here where she was like she's going to go to sleep or something. Now, I always say this, especially in this day and age, how, you know, being in my 40s now, I'm like, look, I can't not say that I wouldn't fall asleep too sitting there. Okay? It doesn't take much for me to fall out these days. So I'm like, even if my life depended on it, that might make it worse. It might make it worse for me if they're like, Paul, your only job is to sit there and stoically look ahead while this trial for your life is going on. I'd be like, y'all, I'm sorry. Go on, send me to Old Sparky. Ain't no way I'm going to be keep my eyes open sitting in that chair like that. Absolutely not. You know, just go ahead and send me to the gallows, okay? And so, I feel for them on that, like, level right there, because I'm like, I don't know if I can do it either. But she has this creepy look. Okay, then when she interacts with the officer and she's like asking him to pour the drink, I guess she's not allowed to get it or whatever, which for her, we don't want her getting up and reaching over stuff, right? We've already seen what she's capable of. But this thing is she does like this where she's like, I was just like, everything is so intentional and so methodical. So much like a predator watching prey.
Like how we always do. And basically, I was like, Taylor was asking like, do you wanna hang out with Shad? She was asking me like for consent to hang out with Shad, to bring him over, and I was like, yeah, that's fine, that's cool. Okay. And so,
could I stop you right there? I'm sorry. I just have a quick question. So when you said you were at the apartment, which apartment is this?
The Eastman, the Meadowview East apartments.
Okay. Is that kind of where you thought Taylor was staying, or whose apartment was it?
It was it was the same apartments that I lived there. So it was like, I'm sorry, what?
Sure. So the apartment is on Eastman that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I interrupted. You were with Taylor, and then she brought up hanging out with Shad?
Yeah.
Did you meet up with Shad that night?
Yes, I did.
And where were you sort of hanging out with Shad then?
We picked him up, went back to the apartments, and was just chopping it up.
Is that the same apartment you were just talking about?
Yes.
All right.
I wanted to include this longer clip simply because, number one, we're kind of hearing what was going on that evening with this third party who we talked about earlier in the intro of that evening, but also to see her behavior. She is laughing. She's like kind of shy to me. The vibe I'm getting from her is she's kind of like almost doesn't know what to do with this level of attention on her. And so she kind of gloats and does weird things in it. Now, I'm not excusing her behavior at all because I'm just literally like shocked by it. Because again, when I see stuff like this going on in the courtroom, and the person sitting here and laughing and smirking and, doing all this like it's her buddy up there and, oh my God, I haven't seen him and let me blush or whatever. All I can think of is the victim's family sitting there watching this, right? I mean, I'm not related to these people, you know what I'm saying? So there's that level of disconnect there, if you will. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's an entirely different thing, even though I can have compassion and empathy for it and be like, my God, like how must they feel? But, it would be a whole different story if it was my loved one up there and their alleged perpetrator, murderer is over there laughing and smirking, right? I mean, I can't imagine being in the same room with that and how that would go over. I look at how it makes me feel watching it from the sofa, right? To people whom I don't even know. So I can only imagine it. My heart goes out to them in that way. But also, again, I'm sitting here, I'm like, girl, you're fighting for your life, right? I mean, this is not cute. And you're going to get up there and start laughing and smirking and stuff like that. Zero respect, zero self-awareness, okay? And one could, and, almost look at it like, oh, she has to be, psychotic or whatever they're trying to label her with. Because, like, who would do this, right? But again, I just also think it's this kind of personality. It's almost like what was her upbringing like? And we'll get into a little bit of that when her father takes the stand.
I'm going to afford the attorneys an opportunity to talk now that I've clarified.
Oh yes, that one was quite the lovely little thing. Let's pretend to airgun the judge during trial. This is what also tells me she doesn't have anything to lose, right? This is a person who clearly doesn't care about themselves. Clearly not anybody else, right? How could you, if you're willing to, number one, do this to another human being, but to also act this way? It's almost like you've given up. Almost like, I know I'm going away for life, or the death penalty, or whatever was on the table, for the particular person. So I'm just going to show out for this entire time and just really rub it in. Now let's go ahead and watch those clips of her father coming in to testify. And just, so her father is currently incarcerated. So that's why you're seeing it that way. But this first clip, pay attention to the back and forthness that they do, the quick eye glances and whatnot. Now, again, I have no doubt that she probably hasn't seen him in a long time. And so there's that level of like, oh, dad type thing. But one thing that I noticed during this is, the dad's coming in to testify and being called up there pretty much on her behalf, right? But even then, so there's times where I'm just like, dude, work with her attorney, right? They're trying to paint her in the best light possible. And it's like, he's just not going with it, right? And so it started to inform me a little bit more where I'm like, well, you see what's going on here, right? I mean, imagine the childhood that she might have had. Now, again, I'm not trying to excuse her behavior at all, but it's one of those things where I'm just looking through that lens of like, okay, I'm piecing this together.
You were living in Green Bay, correct?
Yeah, you know that, Chris.
Okay. And your daughter is Taylor Denise Schabuisness, is that fair?
She is.
Who is her mother?
Marla,
Okay. And you were married to Marla for a while, sir?
of course.
How many years was it?
We were married about 10, together about 15, 16.
Now, you hear the way he talks to the defendant, like, that, Chris, of course, where he's just as equally annoyed with the defense attorney, and maybe they don't like him or whatever. But I also just wonder if there's some level going on here of, it's not cool to be testifying, when you're incarcerated and that type thing, right? Because it's almost like this us against them. Like the vibe I got from both her and him was we're against the system, even if the system's trying to help me get out of as much trouble as I can. That type thing. Like we're going to fight it tooth and nail. I mean, you saw her attack her first attorney, right? So there's that. Now, also notice her behavior in these clips where she's laughing and smirking and almost like staring at the camera. Now, this is one of the trials where this really made me start thinking of this, and I was again trying to imagine myself where I was like, okay, I think I would be super self-aware if I was in that situation and cameras were coming up to me, almost like I don't know what to do, right? You know what I'm saying? Where I'd be so awkward, like, well, hey, what's up, kind of a thing. And at times I get that vibe from her, but also listen to her kind of hear her father talking. And I almost have to question her. I'm like, is this the most, I don't want to say attention she's ever gotten from him, but almost like what was their relationship like type situation? Because it does seem like, I don't know, there's just something off there, and I don't even know what I mean by off, but it just seems like maybe almost like the basic level of she wasn't hugged enough as a kid type situation.
Did that take a toll on your daughter, Taylor?
Well, of course.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit, sir?
On my son as well and me.
Okay. Right. It took a toll on everybody, correct?
But yeah.
And when her mother passed away in May of 2009, how old was Taylor?
11, probably 11 and a half.
Okay.
Now, again, you see kind of her facial expressions looking back and forth and hearing her dad talk about, oh, it took a toll on me. And, the family and on her, she was 11 years old when the mother passed. So you can start piecing these things together to see where we might have arrived at the current situation. Because that's the part of this where I'm just like, now again, a lot of people have their parents pass and tragic things happen and they don't do these heinous acts, right? So again, it's not an excuse or anything. But one of the things that fascinates me about true crime is the psychological component of it and figuring out the why. And again, I don't think we'll ever figure this out. And it could just literally be as simple as, I got too high, sorry. Which is kind of how she seems to be like, yeah, my bad. It was a really rough come down and that's kind of what happened. My mind has a hard time computing that that's what it could be, right? That's something that simplistic, something that horrifying could come out of something, just that simplistic of, oh, it was a bad come down, so that's what I did to him, it's like my brain won't accept that reality, you know what I'm saying? So I want to figure out the why and keep going further. So with things like this of, okay, well, the mother passed, okay, well, the dad's currently incarcerated, I start painting this picture that could possibly be the why, at least for me.
She's a little rambunctious. Nothing. I mean, she played volleyball. She had a good amount of friends she hung out with. She was a normal kid.
Okay. Did things change at all for her?
I wouldn't say too much. She got in trouble a little bit at school, but I don't know, something with a band instrument.
What happened with that?
She just took somebody's band instrument.
Now, the dad sounds also completely disconnected, where he'll be like, oh, some of the band instrument. Oh, yeah, she stole it. And then, again, you see her scrunching her face up, this thing she does this, almost like, I don't know what to do with people talking about me, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, or whatever. But then he kind of describes her, and all I'm thinking of during this time is I'm like, what was she like in high school? Which was not that long ago from here. Okay, this is not, a 40-year-old woman, right? To me, she looks much older than what she is. But, I'm just sitting here thinking, like, I'm envisioning, like, not the high school bully, but something similar of that type energy of, an aggressor. She's going to pick on who she might view as could be weaker, but also possibly sticking up for, the somebody who was completely picked on, like an outcast or something like that. I could see her being both of those things. And again, I don't know. This is just, me going off of thoughts and whatnot. So let's keep watching.
About a year and a half ago, maybe.
Okay. And she had a baby, correct?
Yes, she did.
And the baby is currently living in Texas with the grandparents, correct?
Yeah. How is that relevant to anything here? Why do we need to talk about him?
Let me ask you this. So, before the baby was born, was she placed at Nicolay Psychiatric Center?
Before the baby was born?
Yeah.
Possibly.
Okay. Did you see her at the Nicolay Psychiatric Center?
Oh,
when she was there?
yeah. I'm sorry. It's just so much going on.
It's through Brown County.
Yeah, I went to take her there myself, actually.
Okay. Why did you take her there?
She just wasn't in the right state of mind.
Now, again, we get another piece of the puzzle. She had a baby. The baby's living with the grandparents. Now, this is one thing that I'm talking about that I said earlier. When the father's like, why do we need to talk about him? I'm sitting here thinking, the lawyer is trying to paint your daughter in the most sympathetic possible way he can. Don't backtalk him, right? It's like, work with him on this. Now, also, we get yet another piece of the puzzle because we hear that she had gone to the psychiatric center. He's like, well, she just wasn't in her, right state of mind or whatever. He's very closed off with this. And now, most of the time, the way these things go is before somebody's going to even get up there, they would have, briefed them or gone over stuff and whatnot. So that's why to see him be slightly combative with the attorney is very surprising to me, but also very telling in trying to figure out, what her upbringing might have been like, how we arrived at today.
Yeah, right. Prior to
Yeah, and
she was doing really well there too until her boyfriend / husband got out of jail. That turned everything upside down.
in part because of the methamphetamine use, right?
Yep.
So Taylor was doing pretty well, and then she started using the drugs.
Now, you heard this part. This is the key things here. And again, more pieces to the puzzle. Going back to the drug use, she was doing well until that. And then the father, who clearly does not like this boyfriend husband dude and says that he messed her life up. So you can start piecing all this stuff together. Okay, we had some kind of, situation with the boyfriend, husband, had baby doesn't live there, lost mother, father's in jail. You can start piecing it together to see because, and again, even when we have offenders that we've seen who might commit heinous crimes and stuff like that, the fact of how far she went and the things that she did in doing these post-mortem things, the way she disposed of the body and all this, is so outrageous, and it's not even anything that's blown out of proportion by a prosecutor or anything. I mean, she's confessing to this stuff, right? She's the one saying this is what she did. The evidence shows this with the body, right? So that's where I'm just like, what takes it to that next level, right? Because taking his life to begin with is horrible, okay? But then there's these other components after component layered on top that you're just like, how did we get to there? Now, let's take a moment and listen to one of the mental health people who get up there to basically say, yep, she's psychotic. She doesn't know what she's doing, or she didn't know at that time. And let's hear what she has to say about it.
Ask you about whether you agree with their opinions or not. I'm going to ask you about what is your opinion as it relates to your evaluation an assessment of Taylor Schabuisness?
My opinion is that she qualifies for the not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. My opinions are that she was not responsible because of a mental disease. She wasn't responsible for the criminal conduct because at the time of the event, she had the mental disease, and it both affected, she lacked substantial capacity to both appreciate the wrongfulness of her conduct at the time the homicide occurred, but also she could not she couldn't conform. She lacked volitional control. She couldn't conform her conduct to the requirements of law. She was lacking in her ability to control herself. The volitional control both was lacking. That's my opinion.
Well, I'll definitely agree she was lacking in control. Okay, that much is clear, right? It's always so interesting when you get these expert witnesses on the stand and the things that they will say. I don't know this person, right? I wasn't there in these interviews and all the kind of stuff she did. I don't agree with it. Who am I, though, right? Just a guy with a sofa. And I just think that once you get, getting paid to testify and this kind of stuff and you get on the stand and all that, it throws the entire, balance of justice off. Once money's involved, you just can't really trust that much of what's coming out of somebody's mouth, right? We've seen this time and time again on the stand and whatnot, and it's just always shocking. And so, in my opinion, I'm like, well, of course she's going to go up there and say she wasn't responsible, because in that moment, at that time, she was, had this, episode or whatever, but she knew enough to try and cover things up, though, so she was okay with that, right? This is not how this works.
A mental disease or a mental defect or both?
Yes.
Both?
It's unclear. I tried to get her to be evaluated. I suggested she be evaluated, as Dr. Luchetta did too, further for possible mental defect, brain issues. That didn't happen. But my impression was that she has a mental disease, which is the most likely bipolar disorder.
Now, the key takeaway in this is that she tried to get this further evaluations, but it sounds like she refused or didn't want them and whatnot. And again, I just think there's a certain level with her of giving up, of not really seeming to have an issue with going to prison for the rest of your life. There just seems to be this, kind of attitude about it, right? Because there's just been no assistance of trying to help her own case. You don't attack your lawyer in front of the judge in court, right? You just don't do this. You don't laugh at the judge and pretend to shoot him and, all the things that she's done, right? It doesn't make any sense, and it's the opposite of what you do.
Based on your training and experience, can chemicals exacerbate?
They can, yes.
Did you draw any conclusions on whether Taylor Schabuisness has any kind of chronic brain damage?
I couldn't, because that has to be done. For the first step is what we call neuropsychological testing by us.
The cameraman is wild for this one right here, okay? The way that she just turns to look at her and all that right there, she's like, these little things like that. But again, it's almost like part of me is sitting here and I'm just like, man, I would be so awkward with that camera looking at me constantly. But again, I would just pretend it wasn't there, right? I wouldn't want to even look at it because I think I would do something awkward like that. I think this would be me. Again, I'd be like, hey, just something so stupid. And then people would be like, who is it? He's really crazy. He was talking to the camera, which I guess I'm kind of doing right now. But again, you heard the doctor up there, But again, we'd have to get this neuropsychological stuff and like all these big words. And I'm trying to imagine this, Taylor going along with us. And I'm like, I don't see this. I think this is a person who does not care about their life and nor anybody else, right? And so she doesn't care, right? She just doesn't care. She's at that level.
Yes.
And did you talk about her presentation when she presents herself? Do you have comments about that?
Yes, my comments about that are that it's very unusual, what we call presentation. How is she looking? How does she talk? How does she interact? Everything. What's going on in her mind and whatnot. And it's really, really unusual. And I searched my own 32-year memory bank here. And it's exceptionally unusual presentation, how she's coming across to me, the two attorneys, other evaluators in the school.
Now, I'll give the doctor this. Her presentation or whatever she wants to call it, completely bizarre, right? 100%. And that in and of itself, it does speak, it would be interesting to study that and to get more in depth with that. Maybe not even specifically with this offender, but, whoever. Because she does have this very bizarre thing. And it makes me wonder, was she always like this? Like, what did she do? Now, to me, I'm not a doctor or therapist or anything, but I'm not reading into it like, oh, well, that's because she's this. I mean, I just think that's the type of person she is, right? Almost like she doesn't know any better. The way she interacts with people, it almost is like this natural defensive type way. Again, I go back to the word feral, right? Of just like a person who just seemingly doesn't know how to be within society.
No, not me. Based on my experience and training, that's a psychotic person right there.
They need to make that a sound clip for TikTok or something. Based on my experience, my training, that's a psychotic person right there. I was like, oh, she's really wanting to get that paycheck signed. She's like, look, this is going to be good. Now, remember how earlier I talked about the whole Jeffrey Dahmer thing and how this was Jeffrey Dahmer-esque? And then it seems that old Taylor has a little bit of a crush? Buckle your seatbelts up even tighter because we're going to look at that evidence now.
When you were reviewing the phone itself, the extraction of the phone itself on March 2nd of 2022, did you note any searches related to Jeffrey Dahmer?
Yes.
Was there one? Was there more than one? How many?
24 total.
Okay, now we're just going to say this and we're just going to be real transparent and honest. To me, this right here, like 24 searches for Jeffrey Dahmer. Well, depending on what case I'm covering, somebody, if they went in my Google searches, they'd be like, well, Paul has 50 searches on the Taylor Schabuisness, so what's that say about him? However, let's get into what her searches were for Jeffrey Dahmer.
Searches, such things like Jeffrey Dahmer, Jeff Boyardee, Jeffrey Dahmer's butt, Jeffrey Dahmer walking into court all sexy.
Well, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. I can confidently tell you, you're not going to find the Google search on my thing that says Jeffrey Dahmer walking into court all sexy. I was like, when they said that, I was like, what? Jeff Boyardee is a new one. Y'all know, I haven't done it yet. I'm dying to Google that now. Okay, I'm not gonna lie. Hearing that, I'm like, what comes up if you look up Jeff Boyardee? But my mind immediately goes to like, oh my God, it's gonna be like the depths of Reddit, right? With some horrible images, and I just can't with that. So that right there, I was just like, oh, girl's serious. Like, she's crushing on Dahmer hard.
Then Ms. Luberta, is the screen now depicting Exhibit 101?
Yes.
And that's the photograph from Ms. Schabuisness's Google Photos from February 12th of 2022.
Correct.
Well, all right, that just says it all. A little selfie with Dahmer. I'm surprised it wasn't of his booty. There's something going on here, right? I mean, this fascination with Dahmer. And again, this is what I was talking about earlier, where I'm like, did she idolize him in such a way where maybe like this was like her chance to be him, maybe to seek infamy, such as these serial killers and people like that? But the fixation with Dahmer, where I'm just like, I'm like, girl, have you seen the series? He was gross. I mean, just the apartment alone and the things that he did. But again, look at what we're talking about. Look at what she did. To me, these aren't people, and I say these, I'm talking about Jeffrey Dahmer at this point and her, because I'm lumping them in the same category. They don't look at humans as humans. How could you? Look at the things she was willing to do. I don't care if it was in drugs or not, to this poor young man with his mother coming down to find him. It doesn't get much worse. Now, all that being said, this back and forth and evidence this and evidence that, it all comes down to, does the jury think she was in her right mind, yes or no? Let's see what they had to say.
Okay. The verdict seems to be in order, and I will read it as follows. Question 1. At the time the crimes were committed, did the defendant have a mental disease or mental defect? Answer, no. There's no answer then for question 2. It is dated this date, July 27, 2023, signed by the foreperson. There were no dissenting jurors.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. She's just staring at her lawyer doing his little twiddling thing. Just another, they could have been calling chow. She probably gets more excited about that. But again, this also plays into the whole thing where I think that she knew this, right? I mean, you can't really get out of it. I just feel like she was like, you know what? Charge it to the game. You know what? I mean, I got messed up and did this. Oh, well, type thing. I'm just like, okay. But it also speaks to the no self-value, no self-worth. Clearly nothing for other people as well, because you wouldn't be in this situation if you did.
Thank you. Well, I've listened to the entirety of the testimony over these last several days, and specifically regarding today's testimony with regard to the responsibility phase. I'm satisfied that the evidence is sufficient to support the jury's verdict, and I'm going to adjudge the defendant guilty on count 1 of first-degree intentional homicide as a repeater, count 2, mutilating a corpse as a repeater, and count 3, third-degree sexual assault as a repeater. I'm going to revoke bond at this time then, and I'm going to order a pre-sentence investigation report be conducted. I'll order that be released no later than 1 week in advance of sentencing, and I'm looking to schedule a sentencing date.
Again, nothing. She's just staring off into space. Okay. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Thank God they found her guilty, right? I think this is the correct choice on the jurors. I mean, they heard all this evidence. It was quite clear this was a joke. And, maybe she was trying to do these crazy little antics to come off as crazy, or psychotic or whatever she was trying to go for during this. But again, I don't think it was that at all. I think it was a person who probably had a lot of struggles in her lifetime. However, there's a lot of people with a lot of struggles, and a lot of struggles worse than hers, that don't do these heinous things, right? Now, clearly there's another level of disturbance, considering that she got this pleasure out of doing these horrifying things to his body, both during life and post-mortem. I mean, it's what nightmares are made out of, right? Chainsaw Massacre can't hold a candle to this stuff, right? Now, that being said, I do believe the date was September 23rd for sentencing, but it's sometime toward the latter part of September. If that is not the exact date. I'll be very curious to see what happens. I mean, when you're convicted of these type situations, it's, just a few options on the table, right? Now, one thing I'm curious with a case like hers is, crimes like this often don't go over well. And what I mean by that is clearly with the public and the victims and the family members, but also in prison. Now, most of the time we see these are male perpetrators, and so we know how that goes. We know how the men's prisons are with men who do things to women and children and things of this nature. And I've heard from people in the comment sections how this usually goes down with women, but this is such a specific crime. This is so different. I mean, this is twisted, right? And so I'm very curious, and I'd be curious to know if anybody wants to share their own stories in the comment section how does something like this go over in a women's prison, right? I mean, this is so heinous. This is like another level of almost where you're like, girl, I don't want to bunk with this person, right? I mean, I also think she'll probably fit right in. I think that she'll jump into the prison hierarchy and the power struggles and things of this nature, because she seems to be such an aggressor, such a defensive person. And I mean, I personally think she's going to have to tune that up to survive in prison. But again, I could be wrong. Let me know what you think. And on that note, let me know what you think about the rest of it. I mean, this is so heinous. I've had to hold Roscoe here as my little comfort puppy, just to talk about it. And as usual, and as always, my heart goes out to the victim. I mean, his life was brutally, savagely taken from him. His mother had to find him. She will never get those images out of her mind. Can you imagine finding your child's head in a bucket? I mean, come on. And then to have to sit there and listen to the vile things that the person did to his body after he was dead? Absolutely not. Under the jail for that alone, right? So anyways, if you're still watching, I appreciate it. Drop some sofas in the comment section for Roscoe. And until we meet down in that comment section to continue talking about this heinousness, I'll see y'all there.